I understand it, and because I'm an old church guy, I get it. I appreciate also its Greek roots, but a word that I really have a tough time with, especially in today's culture, is testimony. Mm-hmm. And seeing some of your faces, it looks like you maybe have some of the same issues that I have. Let alone get to the verb testify. Right. So if that doesn't create a major fear issue, testimony creates both a fear issue and then sometimes an issue where, at least for me, I begin to think, when is the boredom going to set in? Because I don't know that we do it right. I don't know that we do it well. I certainly know we don't do it often enough so that it becomes just a regular muscle of sorts, so that there's less emphasis on the word and more emphasis on the content of what it is that occurs. So having said that, I was fortunate enough to be a part of a leadership meeting this week with your leadership team. And let me tell you, they're just some neat folks. And you heard last week when we got together, one of the questions I ask, especially I've always asked this to Brother Bruce, is how can you stand week after week saying the same kinds of things using different scriptures, different accounts to people and not watching change occur? Because it can be very, very frustrating. It's the kind of thing that, frankly, allows pastors and leaders of churches to look for other jobs, because what they believe is that they're not being very fruitful where they are. There's not a whole lot of growth. There's not a whole lot of development. The question gets to be, Lord, I guess this isn't where I should be. And so then you start looking and say, oh, what? I'm just throwing that out there. So during the course of our meeting this week, Diane shared this with me that was a gladdening kind of experience. And she said, I want to say that the course of the trainings over this past year have allowed me to be able to be a better minister to people and their needs, to have conversations with people that perhaps I would not. And I can tell you that gladdens me, because that suggests that maybe most of what I do with us is not just garbage, that actually it has some impact and some import, and folks take something with them. And if you remember, my New Year's Eve challenge to us was not a New Year's Eve resolution. It was the challenge is discover who in your family, in your orbit, have a relationship with Jesus. And the simple and only way to do that is to ask. And what many of you have some interpersonal exchanges with me have admitted is you've never asked. You've just assumed that people are. And I find it absolutely astonishing that we not only do we not know, not only have we not asked, but we're afraid to ask. So one of our leaders shared, I've been able to get close to asking that question, or I've asked that question. And that's really what your lives are supposed to be about. If we gather today and we say that we believe what Jesus did and who he is true. Last week, Sister Sherry, you guys remember one of the things that she said? That's right. And you remember you remember how she kind of prefaced it. You remember how she couched it when she presented it to us? She said, I failed. So I've got to yield the floor to Sister Sherry so you can follow that up a little bit. Would you mind? Okay.
Well, as I said last week, I felt like I blew it. I felt like I had an opportunity to ask a question that I wasn't quite sure the answer of, but had never had the courage to really ask. And I let that opportunity slip by. So I got another opportunity.
Amen.
I was talking to my brother over the phone, and it's not something I really wanted to do over the phone. But as I knew the conversation was coming to a close, in my brain, I'm going, should I say something? Should I not? Should I say something? Should I not? And I just said, okay, I got to do it. And of course, I kind of said, I know this is going to sound off the wall and kind of random. I said, but where are you with Jesus? And he said, you're right. That is kind of random off the wall. I said, these are things that I think about. and I don't know the answers to. And as I get older, you get older, they're on my heart and my mind more because, I care about you and I want to know, where your future lies. And he said, his words to me, he says, I'm good, which he says, I go to church, I do this, do that. And I said, okay. I said, but do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? Is he, what does that mean to you? And he said, yes. He said, I'm assured that, and I feel like that I will go to heaven if something happens to me. He said, I'm not kind of like you. I'm not really out there talking about it to people all the time. I do that either, but maybe, but at the same time, so I like that he answered. I'm still not quite 100% sure, comfortable with his answer. So there's still prayer there. I hope for growth and everything. So I think he's kind of, as we've talked before, it's kind of personal and private. And he is a very personal and private person. There's been things in his life that we didn't find out about until way after the fact. That's just how he rolls. But I asked, and he says that he has a personal relationship with Christ, that he is, but then he said, well, I was baptized when I was a young man, a young boy, and stuff like that. So I still think there's still hopefully openings for future discussions, but he didn't kill me. Well, still talk, so, but yeah, it was awkward, but I'm glad that I put it out there. And again, that might in the future open the doors for more in-depth discussions and talks.
I think one of the other things that you may not realize is that behind the scenes, it may get him to maybe asking himself a couple of questions. Number one, why in the world should you do that?
Yes.
Number two, why does it matter to her?
Yes.
And number three, am I really?
Yes.
So he may begin to do some investigating. I think that's pretty cool.
There's a lot of interesting things that I get from Sherry's. Just when she related that to me, we were in a saloon, as they might say, and I was pretty close to jumping out of my chair, was it not? Because that is exciting. That's where you lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And the funny thing is, Sherry's brother said to her, I'm not like you are. And Sherry's going, what do you mean like I am? I'm just asking you a question. Because the juxtaposition is, in many ways, he's so personal and private, it's probably nothing he'd ever consider doing, because that's a line you don't cross with people. So the fact that Sherry crossed it is something that made her brother go, well, I'm not like you are. With just a question. And folks, if we look, you may not care so much about the people you meet at Sheets, the people that you pass that are at work, even work colleagues, but you're supposed to care about your friends and family. And if you care about your friends and family, this is a question you need to pose. And I will tell you, that's the kind of testimony I can hear all day. I don't need to hear your resume. I don't need to hear 80 years ago that you were baptized and your name is on some bench in some church. None of that matters. Because what Sherry did with her brother suggests Jesus is real. Jesus is real to me, and I need to know if he's real to you. That's a testimony. So, folks, you heard Sherry get on her horse and do some of the tough lifting. The challenges, the gauntlet is down for you to be able to have regular encounters, to be able to come in and talk to us about those, because that's the kind of stuff that's going to inspire other people to try to do the same thing. So, let me pause for a second there. Any thoughts? Any pieces of feedback about that? Hopefully, what you heard from Sherry is you're beginning to think about some of your family members, if not close friends, and figure out how to deal with the punch in the mouth. Or maybe just some of you are saying, nope, it's not my job to do. I would challenge very strongly, it is your job to do if you say that you have a relationship with Jesus, because those are his marching orders. And here's the funny thing, too. After I said I was going to pause, but I did. You don't need to guarantee / confirm that Steve is a believer in Jesus. You just need to tell You can't do soul winning, right? That's another reason that Christians are afraid to do this with their testimony, because they expect now that pray the prayer of salvation with them using the Romans road. That's not necessarily what your job is. Your job is to tell about Jesus. And then if you don't know what to do next, call Brother Gene up on the phone, text me, reach out to Pastor Bruce and say, what do I do now? Because the person said they want to know Jesus, but I don't know what to do next. Then we'll help you through that. Your thoughts? Crazy way to start the morning? I didn't come to church for this. So because there's such an overwhelming thinking process that you're doing right now, hopefully you're mentally putting your list together of folks that you need to, during the year 2022, approach and say, excuse me, do you know who Jesus is? We will revisit this often and frequently, not to be redundant. And if you need
Department of Redundancy Department.
You were correct, sir. So if we need to wade back into this, because some of you are processing all of this now, because it's just too early to overwhelm me with this on a Sunday, we can come back to this if you need to, especially as we're gathering today. So we're talking, our study right now is Grace in Action, Grace Displayed, and that's because after the last 8 years of our study of amazing imputation, should we really be amazed, we should be now ready to take a look at grace in action, grace being displayed. And how, in many ways, we hinder the participation in Jesus' grace. And so we started asking a couple of questions last week based on the scripture that we're going to read right now, 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. So you heard our last president get lambasted about saying that, but I will tell you, just in case so that you know, the Anglican and the Episcopalian churches regularly refer to those books in that regard. That's how they say it.
There's no ND after 2. Right?
That's right. So 2 Corinthians, 2 Timothy. Yes.
Yes.
That's how they do it. Yeah. So it wasn't just our past president not knowing the Bible at all. Is probably the few services that he attended. That's how the person moderating the services referred to that particular book of the Bible. So we're there. 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. To keep me being Paul, from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, and remember that means you have to read what came before in order to understand those surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. This is not the American way. This is not the American ideal. I don't like this a whole lot. So I'm just putting that out there about me, because you all are such very good and faithful Christians. You all probably love and embrace and honor this ideal every single day. So we're looking forward to, thank you very much, Steve, looking forward to you sharing how you do that, so some of us can capture your recipe and then embark on the same path. Having said that, we got through a couple of questions last week. Anybody remember what the gist of the questions were last week? Independence. Okay. So we talked about how important independence is for you, and what areas do you find yourself proudly independent? And last week it felt like at one point in time maybe we were pounding on Sarah a little bit, because we had two boys against one lady. Well, this week it's even scarier with 3 boys against one lady, and the lady actually is holding the seesaw down while the 3 guys are up in the air on the seesaw. So, and you guys know what happens if the lady gets off the seesaw. Right, because some of us used to think that was fun when we were kids. And I'm looking at the college guys right there already. One's beginning to laugh, going, "Don't do that now." So he's a graduate. So the question that we're going to move into is the third question this week, and it reads this way: How do you feel about being dependent and then in parentheses on others? So I'm going to look for you to answer that question because you've done your homework in responding to the question. So pretty much all you may have to do is just read what you've written. But let me preface this by beginning this way. I don't think that this is a hard category for people. And when I thought about it this week and thought about us opening, I was reminded of something. I'm not really a big fan of kids.
What? Really?
No, not a big fan of kids. And that's for my own personal reasons, respect, all that kind of stuff. And I'm an old-fashioned guy about that. But I'm very fond of toddlers. I'm not a fan of kids, but I'm very fond of toddlers, and probably because of where Sarah's going right now. And when I reflect on those, I didn't necessarily get to hang out with Daniel when he was a toddler. Michaela wasn't really a fun toddler when I saw her. This dude was fun on wheels, and he was fun from a toddler until he was like a young boy. So I have lots of memories of this guy as a toddler. And the reason I like toddlers is because you can get toddlers to do stuff. Okay, so some of you have heard it.
That sounds like a control thing to me.
I don't know what you're talking about.
No.
Toddlers will do tricks. And sometimes it's even funnier if the toddlers are doing tricks the parents don't want them to, except you've trained the toddler to do tricks, and their parents are yelling at them, and you're laughing at the toddler getting in trouble. That's a sickness, and I know. Pray for me, because I get joy out of that for some reason. I still do now, and that is one of the issues that will probably keep me out of eternity. But pray for me mightily, because that sounds like it is some sort of sin that the Lord wouldn't like. Except I like it a whole lot, so I'm going to have a tough time not egging on toddlers to do stuff.
His grace is sufficient for you.
And that's almost like I need a pre-blessing, because I go in, and if I see the toddler, I know I'm going to mess with the toddler. So it's almost like, Lord, I'm not sure quite what I'm going to do here, but will you bless it?
I can see Ellen going, no.
Ellen has to watch me do that. It happens in restaurants a lot. And that's all I'm going to say. So that may say, do not dine with me if there are toddlers around, because I think toddlers are the best. And then, unfortunately, toddlers turn into kids, and then they turn into teens, and then, Jesus. I did not say that, but we will pray for you, brother, as well. So I say that as an intro to ask this question, which is, again, how do you feel about being dependent on others? Do you think we start developing the desire to be independent?
About two.
When we can do what?
When you can start talking and saying the word no.
Yep.
Taking care of yourself. Like, well, I'm talking like
a job?
No, like feeding yourself.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You can open the pantry door and you can pull out goldfish. Right? I'm just
the shelf's up there.
Unless the shelf's up there. Or you can do like Daniel used to do and climb on things and have the SpaghettiOs hit him in the face. So, there's been those things.
Hey, but now I got the SpaghettiOs too.
That's but really, once you start to say the word no,
yep,
you're kind of like, I'm doing my own thing.
That wants to be one of the first little phrases.
I do.
Yes.
And that's very true, because I've got Tiffany, she has her, now, Mackenzie's older now, but when she was younger, like 1, 2, and she was saying it, she's like, I do it now.
Right.
Or I do it myself.
Right.
That's the other phrase that you get.
Yep.
And of course, I do it myself, just kind of stays with me.
You're right. You start that mantra pretty early on, and it becomes kind of the motif of your life. And I would almost say, and I like that you guys are recognizing it's when I can start speaking, it's when I can get the SpaghettiOs for myself. But I almost say it's almost impactful, more so, when the kid starts walking. Okay, because so we were at the Lebanese festival yesterday, and we were watching this toddler kid, and there was a puddle. You guys remember how it was intermittently raining yesterday? So you get like a torrent, and then the sun would kind of come out. So there's this puddle, and this little kid who looks like he had just recently learned to walk wanted to head straight for that. So there was dancing going on, Lebanese dancing, and so there's Lebanese dancing and the toddler going toward the puddle. Which one do you think had more of my attention?
The puddle.
The puddle.
But you
So-
know, the jumping in the puddle also goes into your adult years because sometimes when you're driving and you see a puddle, you want to drive through it and have to spray water.
That's why your car sometimes gets stuck in the puddle when you shouldn't have driven through it.
It's a true statement.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just stays with you.
So we're talking. The nice part about Sarah introducing this is some of this is based on habits we develop early and keep for life. Driving into the puddle, and get the car through that, right?
Particularly if there's somebody nearby that's going to get deluged.
That's a bonus, right? That's a bonus. It's just wrong, man.
The truest commercial.
Yeah, but
They are. I'm protesting.
Bruce, he's just over there just shaking his head at us.
So you can see from an early age when watching this kid yesterday, the parents had to keep reorienting the kid. They have to keep pick him up and setting him on a different path because every time they put him back down, he would reorient himself kind of to the puddle. And I was waiting for the inevitability, which didn't happen, unfortunately, because the parents were just they were too good at their job. But the kid always wanted, no matter what was happening, was going to find his way toward the puddle because his sense of I want to go my own way, I want to walk my own walk was very, very much a pronounced part of kind of who he was becoming. And so, in light of even that silly observation, in light of some of the lighthearted exchanges we've had, this question feeds itself a lot into this early experience that sometimes then becomes the permeating component of our lives. So I ask to you, how do you feel about being dependent on others? This is your answer. How do you feel?
I got two parts to this.
Man.
Being dependent on others and liking it
Oh,
is a challenge.
Oh.
Right?
okay.
And then the second part is I don't want people to think that I'm incompetent and can't do something.
Oh,
But like if we talked about last week, if you want it done right, you just do it yourself.
Yeah.
Because usually the way you want it done is the way you want it done. And even though other people can still do it
yeah.
and get the job done, they may not do it the way you would have done it yourself. And so that's challenging.
Okay.
So there you go.
All right. I think that those are both viable things to consider. And as you guys share your answers, what else? What else you got there? Yeah.
I like to feel that I'm dependent in a lot of ways, but at the same time, there is a sense of relief and release when I am dependent on someone else because it takes a burden off of me. So there's kind of a twofold of being dependent yet, but sometimes being dependent on someone else is a good.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Conversation many years ago. And throughout the course of the day, riding down the road to the next job from one other job, we were talking about something and said, yeah, well, I'm going down with family this weekend and everything. And he got quiet and he said, I envy you. You have all these people that you can depend on. He said, I'm pretty much, his dad dead and gone. His mother he couldn't count on. It was just him against the world. A lot of conversations with him that through that, well, to me, it's not just that I'm dependent on my family, but I'm dependent on God to take care of me. Tried to foster a relationship, never really went anywhere with him,
Right.
But he listened. I think really don't want to be dependent. I want to know that I can do things myself. But the fact that there's people out there that care about me, that's willing to step in anytime, that's where I go with it.
And I think that's a completely different understanding of the word dependent. I like that.
It is. And I think you can't do that. You can't do that unless maybe there are two components. One is trust, right? And the other one is you have to have something that matures you beyond your everyday living situation. Because what I just heard you say beautifully, Jerry, is this: depending on the situation, independence is overrated. Independence can be overrated. You guys okay with me saying it?
I think that, and I'm hearing you perhaps what you're saying a little differently. I think, independence, being overrated, if you will, is, indicative of an idea that, I don't require, I don't want the interconnectivity that dependence would involve.
Yeah, and I like your perspective on that, is as I think how most folks outside of this Sunday kind of body would consider that response. I think where Jerry's answer is probably the one that this ultimately is going to drive to, which is from the study we just finished. If Jesus is who he is to you and in your life, you're supposed to trust him, right? And then if you're not supposed to be worrying about what you're going to eat, what you're going to be dressed in, because Jesus is going to take care of that, then you're already interdependent, if not completely dependent on him to meet your needs, right? So I think where Gene's answer is that's how we are during most of our day, is that independence is a quality you're supposed to have. We value it very, very highly, not just as people, but as Americans. We were laughing driving in, talking about our son, and this may be something that you guys deal with less. Our son Miles has a punctuality issue.
Oh, no, I deal with it on 3 sides.
Okay.
All 3.
Oh. Whoa. Okay.
Okay, he's gotten better, but
Okay.
Let's start after him.
I wasn't opening up that door, but it's always good to be able to know what to pray for folks about.
yes.
Uh,
If you're on time, you're late.
yes, and that's some of our mentality. Now, when you go into the big old world of leaving your parents' dependency, you need to learn that if you're going to maintain certain things, you've got to independently make decisions about punctuality and attendance.
True that.
Right? And our joke about our son is he's gotten better about that from a professional standpoint. But if you're going to meet him for dinner, you might as well plan that perhaps he's not going to come, because his sense of punctuality in informal situations doesn't exist.
Oh, no, I don't have that.
That's very good too. But independence, he's learned aside. We don't need to call him up and wake him up now and tell him that he needs to go to work. We don't need to call him up and wake him up, tell him he needs to go to class. He knows how to do that on his own, because that dependence and that independence becomes very, very much something in our forefront that we expect our developing and our new adults to know how to stand and be independent. Kind of make sense? Yes, sir.
Now you're coming at it from a slightly different direction, as being the one upon whom people depend. And maybe we're not excited about having folks require that of us.
Okay, but I can also tell you, I think that there's a period of our lives when we like folks to be dependent on us, and then there's a period of our life when we want them to be less so.
Mm-hmm.
And let me give you a phrase that helps you to understand that: hand out versus a hand up. Right? There's a portion of our lives where we're fine having you dependent until, and then we expect that there's a sense of independence that you're going to develop. And as we talk about this, because we're using the word independence a whole lot, it really is a part of our being that we just don't think about as much, because we just kind of do it. We make decisions. In fact, part of the joy of not only being an American, but being an adult American, is you get to make decisions. 21 is a magical year, is it not? I appreciate that. For you in the room that don't so casually appreciate that the way that Daniel does. You remember 18 and 21 were boom.
Well, 16 too.
back when some of you were back in the 1800s,
When
yes.
you could drive at 16 as opposed to
Correct.
wait until 16 and 8 months.
Correct.
whatever it is. But yes,
16, 18, 20, 21, boom, huge ages because they said, I can do it. You can do it. Let me capture a phrase here and then see if there's a response or some feedback to that. What I've written for you to think about is this. How do you feel about being dependent on others? I despise with so much passion that I negatively anticipate when I am no longer able to do or decide for myself. I repeat, do not appreciate when others make decisions on my behalf. I wish to be consulted at the very least. That's respectful. Disagreements? Thoughts about that?
See, now, this is someplace I think we were kind of edging towards earlier. What you were talking about Miles, and you transitioned a little bit and talked about how we want people to be dependent upon us in certain respects. And there's a reason we want that. We didn't touch that. And that is sometimes we want them to be dependent upon us because that puts us in control.
Okay.
Okay. And there are some of us who are control freaks about that. And we want to be able to, maneuver things with that. But that's what it sounds like there. I'm not mentioning any names. What are we talking about here?
Because their heads turned in the room.
Oh, okay. Anyway, the thing that you got up there is indicating I don't want to be controlled by my dependency upon other people. I can testify to that.
Okay. Yeah.
There's your word.
Yep.
Testify. Okay. This past week, we've had this project we've been working on, and my old boss found out what I was doing with it and didn't like it. So he basically took over some of the process. Fine. And he was right. There were some things that I had not taken into account. So I look at the data afterwards because he said, okay, here, check this out. And I look at it, I'm going, okay, well, you've got numbers that are being duplicated and triplicated here, and that's poorly representing our revenue, okay, because that's where I'm in the finance department, finance and planning. And so I left it with him, okay, I'll check that. And then I was like on Friday a week ago. Monday, he comes back and says, okay, I fixed that. Take a look at it. And so I look at it and going, well, you fixed it all right. All those folks that had duplicate and triplicate are gone completely. And so now that's not a fix. And so I kept on, sending him emails, and he's just up here off of 301 and got no response. And finally, because I said, you know what, I think I know what I can do with this. And I sent him what I thought was the answer. And so since I hadn't heard anything back, I said, I'll go ahead and test my answer and see if that works. Sure enough, it did. And no answer. I finally, because see, what I'm getting at is I'm in a dependent position now, waiting for him to respond. He's a senior person to me. And finally he says, I don't have any time to look at this right now. Right. If you think you can fix it, go ahead. Hallelujah, I got freed up. And now the control was off and I was able to do something. And this is where I went with this whole independence thing. I was released from his control in that regard. And I was able to actually solve the problem and get it out there.
Okay. But in that situation, you're dealing with someone who is your superior, who doesn't know all and isn't all powerful.
Imagine that.
Right. So when we're taking a look at 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, the initiator of the thorn in the flesh is omnipotent, is omniscient, and tells Paul no.
Well, see, your question has in parentheses there on others. Okay. Now, I didn't know that the others were including him.
No, it's not.
Okay. So I'm still working in the human realm.
Yep.
But now you brought in a completely separate supernatural aspect. And that is, okay, dependence upon someone who is infallible and omniscient and omnipotent and all of that sort of thing. Well, isn't that something we really want? Isn't that we want to be able to rest in that and go, he's got, we were in the store last night and this dude is, it's actually kind of comical. This dude is in the produce section and those plastic bags are infuriating. Okay. How do you open those suckers without actually losing your religion? And anyway.
Well, you can lick your fingers, but you can't do that
You should
anymore.
wet your fingers.
Yeah. And that's anyway. So this dude is trying to put his,
Super
I
quick.
think they were potatoes, little red russets, trying to put them in his bag. And he's wearing this T-shirt that says, "Trust God plus chill." And I'm going. So I walked over there and said, "Do you need any help, brother?" He said, and he just about that time got the thing to cooperate. But it was just comical to me that, trust God. This is a dependence thing. It should be somebody you can trust. Okay. Now we're kind of wading into this. The human aspect. Everybody you meet is fallible.
Okay.
Okay. God is not. Yahweh God is not fallible. He does not make mistakes. You cannot surprise him. That's the place you can put your trust, and that's where we have issues.
So, Gene is jumping us far ahead.
Oh, you started,
and I started. So we'll revisit that when we get to down the pike there. But please think very strongly about what it is that Gene threw out there, which is that interdependency with his boss freed him up to be able to do what he thought was best. He also made reference to the fact that now when we're talking supernaturally, we're supposed to want to be able to depend on an infallible, omnipotent, omniscient, everywhere entity who knows us better than we know, and then yet we still don't. But we're going to get there. Foreshadowing. Other thoughts about this being dependent on others? I wrote down here, I put a word down here, folks, we're not supposed to use it in church. I despise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. So, and my brain has been kind of in a couple different places because, when you're born, you're dependent.
Yep.
As you get older, you tend to be independent or you want to be independent. But then sometimes things happen.
Yep.
You get older, you get in an accident, something happens, whatever. And then you're back to relying on other people. And, I'm like looking at this and it's like trying to think, with getting older.
Yep.
And how eventually Steve and I are going to have to rely eventually probably on these two guys
Right, Nate?
to take care of us. No?
Trouble.
Well,
But and sometimes you make decisions on your behalf.
Yep.
Because sometimes that does get like Steve's mom
Right.
has to make a lot of decisions on the behalf of Steve's dad.
right.
Now he's not necessarily as aware of things that are going on, but that would be so hard for you or for anybody who has gone through life and then to rely on somebody else to make decisions for you because you've always done it on your own. That to me is kind of where some of this comes
Correct.
in. You've gotta, sometimes you just gotta let it go.
Well, and this is Peter.
Sorry.
This is Peter.
That's hard for me to say. You understand this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Jesus tells Peter, you right now you can get around and do what you want to do and go where you want to go. But there's coming a day when someone else is going to be taking you where you maybe don't want to go, and you're going to be dependent. And now we're back in the human realm.
Yep.
And it's like I don't really want to go there. I don't want to do that. I'd rather do this. But you are in a condition, a situation where you're powerless to respond to that.
Correct.
You're powerless to rebuke, rebut, whatever the word is. I can't even say, please don't.
Right.
And as we get older, and I know I'm speaking to a crowd that has some older folks in it, as we get into upper years, we find that we are hindered. We'll put it that way.
So the next comment I'm going to make is not one that would necessarily work in a Chinese culture, in a Far Eastern culture, in an African culture, but it works here in the United States. And I'm expecting some response when I say this. When we look at this question about being dependent on others, are you guys going to be okay when it's time for you to give your driver's license back? Yes, young lady.
I am dependent on
That's
these
what
two,
we're talking about.
and I couldn't ask for anything better. They have blessed me so much.
Amen.
You okay with having to depend on these two?
I trust each one of them.
There you go.
Each one.
They were.
They're wonderful.
There's that word we talked about
This
before.
is my youngest daughter.
She's still 12, yes. Trust.
And see, now my mom is here.
Yeah.
Now she's coming up on a big number in a couple of months, and not quite to where Laverne is,
Right.
but still, she's getting there. And bless her heart, she drove herself here.
Yep.
Okay, so she is at this stage of the game still pretty independent. I'm liking that,
Yep.
but she also has a mechanism in place where my sister is helping her.
Okay.
True?
Yeah, speaking of that, my youngest is gonna be 60 in a few months, and she was cooking Mother's Day dinner,
Right.
and she said, "Are you comfortable in driving yourself?" 'Cause she lives in New Kent. And I said, "Yes, I think I can do it." She didn't want, I mean, she would have come and got me,
Right.
but I said, "Yeah, I think I'm comfortable in doing that."
So in mom's case, she still has the choice of whether to drive or not.
True that.
Right.
Sometimes you can have to.
Right. When that giving your license back, because sometimes it's a medical decision. The doctors say you should no longer be on the road. I need to report you to the DMV, and you will no longer be able to drive. And I'm looking at some of your faces right now. That is a major blow. Look, Driving Miss Daisy is a great movie, but we don't necessarily want to live it.
I can remember with my dad when he had to give his up.
Right.
He should have done it earlier than he did, but it took an accident with the grandkids
Oh.
to realize that he couldn't.
Mm.
It's not that he didn't have mental faculties; he couldn't feel his feet, and that's a slight problem when you try and drive.
Mm.
Slight problem.
Particularly when you annex pedals down there.
Correct. Correct. So, but you know, it was hard for him. But then once he did it, and he relied on my mom to take him, he was actually okay with it. But sometimes when you give that license up, you're giving up a lot of your freedom because now you can no longer just, oh, you know, I want to go blah, or I want to go someplace, or I want to do whatever. You can't do that. You gotta
Correct.
call an Uber
Right.
or find somebody. Say, do you mind coming to pick me up? And that I know for me will be
That's an interest. Hopefully, then those self-driving cars will be able to. And then I can just get in and say California or wherever. And kick
self-driving car. Wrong idea about the self-driving.
You hit on a word though we probably don't want to miss here. Dependence. Well, let me start the other way. Is independence the same as freedom?
And that's sometimes our challenge.
Yeah.
That's our challenge. Because there is a lot of freedom in being dependent, but it's a matter of you giving it up and trusting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But we gotta visit, and we've gotta see this theme pretty strongly, because when we then get to the meat and potatoes of our lesson, we'll have plumbed the fact that we struggle with that. We struggle that we think independence equals strict. It's a equal. We think they're equivalent. Freedom equals independence.
Or vice versa.
Yes, we don't necessarily believe that dependence equals freedom.
And back to the whole control
Correct.
I made earlier.
Correct. Now, I like Jerry's comment earlier when he talked about the self-driving cars go to California, because Jerry's living in the Jetsons world, and I'm okay with visiting the Jetsons world. We've not gotten there yet, but I'm sure Elon Musk, if anybody's going to get us there, it's going to be Mr. Musk.
Yeah.
But so I'm looking forward to the Jetsons. Maybe that if we get another 30 years, maybe that car will exist. It doesn't right now. See Tesla incidents.
Yes.
Somebody's
got to be the crash test.
You got it. That's right. That's right. But folks, I think that this word despise is probably one, even though you didn't choose it, is one that you feel. You despise being dependent on other people. Now, and that may not be that way for Mom Laverne and for, it's like Mom's Day in here for
There you go.
I don't know, but I think it depends.
Okay.
Like like even Jerry was alluding, he's got family members that he trusts.
Mhm.
I think it's the trust thing. Like I have people that like Sarah, I have no problem turning things over to her because I know it's going to be handled.
Yep.
And I know it's going to be handled well.
Yep.
I might not, the only issue that I might have, it comes in when there's somebody who I don't necessarily like, somebody maybe who has shown me before where they're unreliable.
Yep.
Or typically the only time you really have that issue is if somebody's handling something for you and you don't agree with the way they're handling it.
Right.
That's when it becomes a problem. So I think it depends on who it is.
I agree, and I think that the theme through that is trusting, and your trust is developed. Your trust grows when, and this is part of that answer, when you're consulted. So for instance, I was going to give you an example, and that one might be too bizarrely close to home. Let's say that you are okay. You're dealing with a guidance counselor in school, and you tell the guidance counselor that you would like to go to an agriculturally based university because you'd like to major in agricultural studies, right? And you go, you tell your guidance counselor in advance, and then 2 weeks later you set the meeting, and when you sit down at the meeting, the guidance counselor presents to you VCU, J. Sargent Reynolds, thank you, appreciate that, and Stanford.
None of those are meeting your qualifications.
And that's a lack of trust right there. Because if that is what the guidance counselor was going to present, they should have asked you during the course of the 2 weeks leading up to the meeting, will these schools meet your needs? But they didn't. And so they've lost your trust right now. So you can't really depend on them because you don't trust them. Yes, sir.
We had a discussion this past week that hit slam on this. We were talking to my mother-in-law about timeshare.
Yep.
And timeshare company sold the property to another entity.
Yep.
And then the new entity was requiring the ones who were really the owners to do certain things that they had not had any opportunity to put their input in.
Right.
And so there's already, again, a lack of trust. You know what? Steve used a word that I don't know that we caught on that either. Dependence is reliance, and there's where your trust comes in.
Okay.
So, but yeah, we encounter this thing all the time. Can we trust the people that we're dealing with? And boy, I mean, sometimes we have to question that. I mean, your college scenario is another one of those. Man, so I've laid out what I'm looking for. Why didn't you at least check with me about those before I'm having to interact with them?
Correct.
We went through a similar situation. You're okay if I share this, right? Because I looked at him and he's like, what? And I said, realtor. He's like, I was thinking the same thing.
That's the one I was going to use.
Well, because so I know, and it's nothing, I mean, Bruce, with my realtor, he would have listened to me, right?
Yeah.
So, right, Bruce, you would listen to me. Yes. Just making sure you're listening to me. So when Steve and I were looking for our first house, we worked with a realtor and we had told her what we were looking for. We wanted a newer house. We wanted central air. We wanted a newer house. And so she went away and she would line up these houses for us.
Right.
And we would drive there, and as we're driving up, we're going,
This is kind of an old neighborhood.
what? And there was nothing structurally wrong with with the houses,
But
but
it would be a house with that was built in the 50s
uh-huh,
that had window air conditioning units
yeah,
and stuff. I mean, I got to, and it was like house after house after house. I got to the point where I would turn and walk and look at the house and turn around and walk out. Nope,
Right.
this isn't what we asked for.
Right.
so
We asked for this, and I
Right.
reiterated to her, we asked for this. Let's go to another house. This is almost the same house.
yeah. So we ended up in the house that we found was because we found it. We found it. But unfortunately,
You're under contract.
well, yes, but this is before we had that reliance on God. Okay, so you gotta remember where we were back in 96, 97. You gotta think where we were.
Wow.
So yes, we found the place that we needed to be. Little did we know where it was going to end up because we had him as a neighbor,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, but
That
you
plan.
know, the bad thing about it with the realtor was that even though she did not find the listing for us, she was our realtor.
She was under contract.
She was under contract and she got the commission for it,
Yes.
which was so frustrating.
Agreed.
And again, we lost our trust in her. Did we go back to her we're looking for our second house?
Mhm.
No. We worked with somebody else that I knew,
Right.
and that we trusted with Renee. But yeah, but you're right. It does, you tell somebody what you're looking for, and if they don't hit at least those qualifications,
Right.
you're kind of like, hit the road.
Correct. From a human standpoint, there's a lot of consulting. There's a lot of interpersonal interaction that needs to happen for you to get to the point where you trust the way that you do. I mean, even so, for you folks that have spouses in the room, some of the interdependability has taken years. It didn't happen right away. At first, when you got together, there was a whole lot of passion. You guys ignore. You put your hands in your. And you don't even look. It's hide under the bench. There's a whole lot of passion that. Exactly. Thank you. That's my man right there. It takes you. Okay, you can take them out now. There's a lot of passion. It takes years for you to recognize how to listen rightly and well, how to feel like you've been consulted, and then how to trust that the other person is working in your best interest. Yes, sir.
How to feel like you've been consulted as
Yes.
opposed to being consulted?
Well, because sometimes there's a thing over the years that happens where we don't always speak to each other. You feel like you've been taken into consideration if there's a decision that's been made that you didn't necessarily know about right away.
Smoke and mirrors, Gene.
Okay.
I'm not touching that comment made there by Brother Jerry. So all significant letters and comments need to be directed to Brother Jerry for that with the smoke and mirrors. I did that, not mine. But trust is a key component if you're going to relinquish your sense of independence. Make sense? Because I think other than that, as Americans, as Westerners, as adults, we despise being dependent. Now watch, here's the follow-up question. So, how do you feel about others being dependent on you? How do you feel about others being dependent on you? Now, this is an interesting question actually posed with you two in the room. But how do you feel?
Makes you feel kind of important,
You're darn too.
right? Because you're like, okay, they know I can do this and they rely on me. Yes. You can take your superhero pose, right? Yes, there you go. There you go. And it's almost like for myself, I'd rather somebody depend on me than the other way around,
Uh-oh.
because it makes me feel needed and useful. That's where I went with that.
I'm in your boat.
At first,
Yep.
it can be an empowering thing.
Yep.
And a humbling thing. But when that continues for year
Yeah.
after year after year after year, then it gets to be a stumbling block for you.
Right.
To reach out and do things again.
Yeah. I think that's a really fair assessment because I like to live in Sarah's boat, which is here I come to save the day. But the high of that only lasts so long. When there's a constant interdependedness, that is one where there's almost not an equal distribution, where there's not, sometimes I can't hold the seesaw up, you've got to hold the seesaw up. When there's not that ability to have that exchange, it wears on you. It can be draining. The answer that I had down here that may actually encourage us to think a little bit is, I'd rather, this was kind of where Sarah started, I'd rather have people dependent on me than to be the dependent party. It's a shameful feeling. It's demeaning. It's demoralizing. It makes me indebted. Whoops.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It makes me indebted, and I don't like being indebted. Now, what I mean is that's the party who is in debt. That's kind of, that last part is how they feel. Make sense? And when I think about Jerry, and Jerry's got great grandkids. Some of your family has always looked towards you over the past several years as a source of, can you help? And some of that gets to be wearing, even though the means and the ability may be there. The fact that that line of I'm independent and you're always dependent, that wears on you after a while.
And we've even had it with our benevolence to the church for the years. Long before our group, Faith had their people. It was always through, and it was always, the end of the month,
Right.
so to speak.
Right.
I don't have anything.
And I wasn't even talking and thinking about that, but you're right. In churches, when you have a benevolence committee, when you have a deacons group that's always ready to assist, there are folks who find their way almost there like it's a paycheck to have needs. And look, although I mentioned earlier what it feels like to, how do you feel about being dependent? How do you feel about being independent? Unfortunately, there's a lot of folks who are comfortable being the dependent people all the time. And now, I would like to pose that maybe from a human standpoint only, without throwing kind of the Jesus and the Yahweh God aspect in, that's not necessarily a positive thing. It can be a draining thing. It can be a draining thing to the point where you're challenged to have a relationship with the person, even though you might still be there helping from a financial, from a fiscal standpoint, from a support standpoint. But you almost know when the phone rings, when you get the text, I'm seeing Steve's face, that you got a person who's going to be asking you for something as opposed to a person who's going to be offering you something that's going to be uplifting. And so we have a really tough time with independence, dependence. So let me ask this, because I think this is now a more fully fleshed question, and this might get your passions up rising a little bit more. Next question, which I think is going to be touched on by Brother Nate. How do you feel about people knowing you're dependent? How do you feel about people knowing you're dependent? Let me give you an example I've given you before, because I think it's a really good TV example and one you'll identify with, even though it's 50 years old. There's an episode of All in the Family where lifetime hard worker Archie Bunker becomes unemployed. And in this episode, he's forced to do something that he never ever considered that he would have to do, and that is to submit an application for unemployment. And at that time, kind of all of those government systems were referred to as welfare. So welfare in that particular time, that was profanity. And getting welfare and him having to admit, even to his wife Edith, that that's where my need is right now, was embarrassing, was humiliating for him. So I want to throw that out, maybe to consider. I don't know if that's where our culture is today. So having said that, what do you feel? How do you feel about people knowing you're dependent?
And it goes back to being ashamed,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
Especially people know,
Yeah.
because then they know, and they sometimes look at you differently.
Yes. Yes.
They treat you sometimes differently.
Yes.
And that just wears on your psyche.
Okay. And even if sometimes they don't, We think they do.
Exactly, because we're like, wow, it's like having a zit on your face.
Yeah.
They see it.
Yep.
And it's just, it always draws your attention, right?
Yep.
Whether they really see it or not, but you know it's there. And so if you know it's there, they know it's there.
Yep.
I saw a picture with a caption, and I didn't read the article, so please don't hold me to that. But it was basically a quote from Elon Musk that said, Americans are wanting to not work at all.
Right. Right.
And if you're going to not work at all, doesn't that automatically make you dependent upon somebody else to do for you? And so you're right, we're in a very different culture than what Archer was.
So
Because it is more of a, putting your hand out and getting on the dole. So, it's kind of like, and this is going back some years. I was in some financial struggles and talking about people knowing you're dependent, going to the grocery store line and you're having to pay with food stamps.
Right.
That makes it evident to everybody that you're dependent upon the government for something.
Right.
Okay. Even if it's just your groceries. And that is a pride thing. That is an embarrassment. That is I can't provide for my family sort of thing. And that for guys, I mean, you girls may have a different take on it, but for guys that is difficult. It is humiliating.
What I will say now, the programs are set up where there's no more of that food stamp stuff that,
You put down a card.
they stick it on a debit card
Mhm.
and that takes some of the humiliation out of it. And I think that's a good thing. But
Mhm.
yeah, I used to work in a supermarket
Yep.
and people would come in with the monopoly with the
Monopoly money.
white with purple and pink writing on what I remember.
Right.
I think our culture does more where the majority of them are okay with being dependent on certain things,
Yeah.
which is very different than where we might have been
Yeah,
50,
because-
60 years ago.
Mhm.
I
Shame
think
is
it's less than, sure, it's less than your dependence.
Entitled. They're
Entitled, yes.
not
and-
grateful for anything anymore. They're entitled to this.
Okay. Yeah.
Even the commercials say, get all your, all you want, all your due.
You get all your due, you're going to be gone right now.
Absolutely.
They don't think
Works both ways.
But
I know.
but I think just it's a lack of shame. You look at their culture across the board, as Gene was just saying, feel that sense of shame because you're paying with food stamps. People don't have that sense of shame.
Correct.
And it goes across the board with just about anything, food stamps or how they dress or talk or act or anything. There's no sense of shame.
Yeah, and I like that. I when you say how they dress or talk or act, that sense of shame has impacted our culture so much so that the things that we now find shameful are things that 50, 60 years ago wouldn't have really been shameful. And the things that we don't find shameful are things that from 50, 60 years ago, our fathers and mothers would say, how can you realistically be doing or saying or thinking or singing that? Right? And so I think that shame certainly impacts that. How do you feel about others knowing of your dependence? And look, since we're talking a little bit Bible, and I don't want us to do tons of Bible, I think Jacob is a pretty good example of a guy who was probably not only known as the trickster brother, but probably a guy who was pretty independent and beginning to amass his own self-worth. Not self-worth, individual worth, like riches and wealth. 2 wives, some concubines, kids, something's coming back from his uncle's place, just laden down with stuff, right? And when he encounters this Christophany, when he encounters the angel of the Lord and wrestles with him, after that encounter, Jacob is almost going to operate like he's got a hip replacement. And every time he's struggling to walk, he's got to remember the source of where that came from. And getting through the day is still even kind of a reliance on, Lord, you got to help me even walk. You got to help me even walk. What a blessing this isn't. I don't know that there was a shame that impacted that guy then because of maybe the exchange, because he asked for a blessing, he got a blessing, but he also got the hip broke, right? But when we move that in some ways to modern day and we take a look at Paul's scenario, I like the scenario a lot because here's the thing. How much did Paul like this thorn in his side?
He asked for God to take it away.
How many times?
So you think if he's asking for it to go away, he's a big fan.
Correct. Right. And where he ends up with this is remarkable because I can't get there. You understand what I'm saying? Is if you have to implore the Lord 3 times to go, this ain't working. And the Lord goes, oh, well. The fact that you have it says you have to rely on me and you need to be okay with that. And Paul does a 180 and says, okay, I'm okay with that. I'm sorry, he doesn't live in my neighborhood. He doesn't live in my village because that's not how we operate where I live. Other comments about this? Brother, virtual guy there, 3 a.m.
4:30 now. You hit on a word that I've been thinking through all of this, and you guys have been talking about is worth, or self-esteem, perhaps. You need to mute yourselves now because it's definitely echoing. Thank you. All 3 of these, I mean, dependence on others, how others are dependent on you, and then knowing, the thing that I keep coming back to based on experiences I've had recently is just that sense of worth. And it seems to me that there's almost like a inversely proportional aspect of my freedom and my worth, right? And you were just talking about, how many people don't want to work and being on the dole. I think it does take a toll on them, and the way that they've been able to deal with it in our world today is you've got social media. You don't have to deal with people personally. You can just live behind that veil, and you look at it. You go places. I was noticing this at dinner the other night. Married couples. There was a family of 3. It was a mom and a dad and a son. And the son was probably about 16, 17. Mom and dad were both on their phones the whole time during dinner. And it just seems like our entire culture now is walking around with their heads down. I don't think that's an accident. That a lot of that's what's happened is that people's worth is in the gutter. And so they can live the highlight reel out of their lives on social media. You don't get to see their condition. So I don't know, that's just the word that kept coming to me as I listened to you guys talk through all this stuff. And you hit on a lot of words I had written down as well, but that where is my worth? And I think conversely to that, I think if I'm willing to give away some of my freedom, my control, whatever that is, then like with my wife, there's a lot of stuff she does better than I do. And when she does it, that frees me up to do other things that I would do lousy at what she does. But I don't know if we're always so willing to do that because our worth might be impacted by that. It's like, well, that means I can't do that. It's like, no, maybe somebody actually does do it better than I do.
Segue into our next and probably our last question as we work together today. And thank you. Worth, I think, is tied up in that sense of independence, that sense of dependence. Trusting folks, I think, messes with our sense of self-worth, if not self-esteem. The magic screen is going to show you that a response to that last question reads, this might even, how do people feel about, how do you feel about people knowing that you're dependent? This might even be worse than being dependent. Others knowing my condition allows the opportunity to be pitied, condescended to, or looked down upon, almost the way people long ago felt about the American welfare system. Mm-hmm. So the answer here that's suggested is that I think in many ways people would almost rather be dependent than having to admit their dependence. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
Back to Bruce's comments and what we've said, what you said earlier. Is our culture today so down on their own worth? And I appreciate that terminology. Do people today feel so worthless that they feel like it's okay to be dependent, and that they're just I'm no better than just doing this. I'm no better than just taking a check for doing nothing. Are we to that point where we don't even really care what people think as a society?
Well,
and as far as people even knowing we're dependent, who cares? I'm not worth anything anyway, so I'm just going to go on the dole, and that is that the mentality we're seeing in society?
I appreciate the question, and I think that there's a difference. We've talked about this over the past several years as we've been together, and that's this: culture shapes language. And Steve kind of alluded to this in part when he was talking about the things that we say, the way that we act, the things that we value. We've changed kind of. We don't call shame shame, right? And if we do call it shame, it's in a way that you shouldn't use it. You have fat shamed me. You have clothing shamed me, right? And that's not a good thing for that to be an issue, right? So where you normally could be a critic and say you can't do that because then you're doing something that is a kind of shaming, and shaming is not okay, right? And when you say, well, is it okay? Has our culture changed so much to the point where people are okay being on the dole, or people are okay because they're feeling self-worthless, they're feeling worthless? I would challenge that in that if you take a look at people's resumes, especially the brief things that I read from folks that are online, people take value in these things that they think are valuable. They are an entrepreneur of this. They're an entrepreneur of this. And if they were to write their obituary, they would have something that they would own, because this society says almost anything that you own that is yours is of value. Even if part of what you do is you have quit the rat race and you are getting some sort of assistance in order to sustain your living, because now you are looking to find your own way.
Well, I think part of it is which is kind of funny if you think about it, the things in our past that you would have looked up to a person for, that you would have said, okay, that person is honorable, they're dependent, all those values that you would have held in high esteem. It's sort of a reverse, because what's happened now is people sort of celebrate their victimhood. So in doing that, it kind of eliminates that shame, because now you take pride in the fact that, oh, I'm this type of victim, I'm that type of victim, and you have no problem putting that out there for anybody to see, and you use your victimhood to say, well, and somebody said entitled earlier, but you say, I'm entitled to these benefits because of my victimhood. And so you can justify the fact that you might be getting free handouts and those types of things. And in a way, it's kind of sick, but you take pride in the fact that you're getting those handouts because you deserve it.
Correct.
So I'm this type of victim.
Correct. And that's where our culture is, folks. And so the discussion and I hope that's a wonderful response to the question that you posed earlier.
Excellent.
That's the culture we're in, folks. Look, the fact that we meet on a Sunday the way that we do, that ultimately is about honoring and glorifying the Lord. We're not a subset of our culture today. We are kind of aliens in our culture, right? Because some of the values and things that we're talking about, these are things from yesteryear, in addition to being things from this instruction manual that we have. So when Steve says, and he regularly is reminded of this, that it is your right to be a victim. In fact, it is your badge of courage. You should let that freak flag fly today. If you are a victim and you need reparations, or you need somebody to deliver something to you, because you're entitled to that. You deserve that because you were victimized unfairly.
this is really very interesting because Steve has really kind of turned it around here, and I think he's right. Is there is no sense of shame because there's instead of the shame of having to go onto public assistance, we'll call it that. There's a pride because I'm getting what is due my victimhood. I like that word. It's all turned around.
Yep.
It's all different now, and it doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay.
So it's no longer asking for help, it's achieving a victory.
Yeah, because you were a victim, and now you finally won.
You won.
Now, I want us to think about this when we get to this, because this is going to be further down the pipe, right? Because I agree, this is where our culture is, that being a victim and then embracing that which you are due is part of the American way these days, part of the Western way. So remember the last study we just finished?
All 8 years of it.
Yeah, exactly. That ultimately, and this is down the pipe, because I want us to talk about the human condition before we talk about the godly condition. You were victimized, right, by your greatest ancestor. So, if you just want to put it in today's culture, you were victimized by your oldest ancestors. Following? That'd be Adam and Eve. And as a victim, right, you are free to announce, I am a victim of something I did not do, a transgression that occurred that was not mine. But what do I deserve? Well, that's a discussion, by the way, guys. That's a discussion with your folks, the cat litter guy. What do you deserve? And somebody said this earlier today. You deserve, because of your status and what your forefathers did, death. That's right. But the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ. So you can get to that discussion, even using the victim mentality, if the person's going to own their victimhood, by saying there's an answer and there's a gift to address your victimhood. And you don't deserve it, but doggone it, you can grab it. Down the pipe. We're going to get there. Okay? So you can use the culture as long as you're willing to wade into the water and have the discussion. You want to be a victim? Okay, let's talk about it. You got to go back to the roots of where it started. Final question for today to have you think about. And it may be kind of two-parted. Does dependency affect your effectiveness? Well, does dependency affect your effectiveness? Okay, and then, because Pastor Bruce brought this up, the second part of that, we're not there yet, is does dependency affect your sense of self-worth and how? So the first part is, does dependency affect your effectiveness?
And it can be positive and negative.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Because in your negative time, your negative stuff is you can rely on others too much.
Yep, exactly.
Right? Just like we see now,
Yep.
right? And you may not you won't reach your potential because, if you are always being dependent on others, relying on your potential,
Yep.
maybe your own potential.
Yep.
Okay. But positively for effectiveness, right?
Yep.
You get better outcomes. I'm thinking project management.
Right, I got you.
You get better outcomes. You're able to learn new skills, right?
Right.
Because it could be that somebody can do something better.
Yep.
You may want to learn how to do it.
Yep.
You're like, oh, or you might get a new idea. Like, I never thought of it that way.
Correct.
And then if you do have that, you can focus. And I think this was talked about even last week. You can focus on my strengths because we don't all do the same thing in the best way.
Right.
Right. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. So being dependent on others, you have your strengths that you can play up, but then you've got others with strengths that can better complement you.
So you're almost talking about that mysterious entity that Jesus put together, the church,
Sort of kind
which has unique individuals
Yes.
with different skills and different abilities who are supposed to contribute because the things that I do, you may not do, and the things that you do, vice versa.
But you can take those same things and you can translate them to other areas of your life.
Correct.
Your family life,
Right.
your friends, your work,
Yep.
school.
Yep.
I mean, they translate to other areas, but sometimes we got to remember that, which is challenging. It is challenging, so that was where I went with that. Just, it could be good and bad.
Yep, love it.
My immediate thought goes back to my whole scenario I talked about for work. When I'm dependent upon somebody else to do something, in sign language, it looks like this. It's called waiting. Waiting.
Yep.
I'm waiting for something to happen, and I can't move my effectiveness forward until whatever that is occurred. And so the dependence can adversely affect your effectiveness when it puts you in wait mode.
Yep.
That is when you have to wait on somebody else to do something in order to be effective in what you're trying to do.
Okay.
I think that's where it hits me the most. On the other hand, trying to look at it from her perspective, which I'm not very good at, where
I didn't say I was either. I
Yeah.
can see it, but it's hard to think about it. I'm being honest.
well, when you have subordinates, which I don't, I'm looking up at the bottom rung. All right, so I don't have that kind of thing. But when you have you have people reporting to you, and you have to rely on them to get something done, then it's kind of like what an old boss of mine said, and I was a contractor at the time, and he was brilliant at this. And I'll mention his name, Milton Lampkin, just a great leader. He said, "If we succeed, it's their credit. If we fail, it's my fault."
Yeah.
That was great leadership.
That's a daunting situation. That's the one that Sarah talked about, is being able to recognize that in and all situations and admit that that's your mantra is a very, very tough thing. Especially when you're a project manager, project leader, to take the negative consequences and say that's my fault. But when we win, it's all of us. That's a tough practice sometimes. Especially when, and you'll hear this in interviews. You'll hear this with politicians, especially sports stars. I. And sometimes when you do a whole lot of I, it doesn't create a network through the team that they feel like they're very important.
Mhm.
And so sometimes you need to share the we, even when it's been more I. And that can be often very, very challenging. When Sarah says it can be positive or negative, one of the things that comes to my mind is sometimes your lack of independence or your need to be dependent sometimes is a negative thing. Let me show you this one, because I get very excited when I think certainly about where Daniel is right now, and kind of watching where Nate's going, and knowing his mom and dad. There's a kind of excitement because how they do things is different than other families do things. Certainly, we did things very different, and we're friends right now with very good friends with someone who their kid was on the 6-7 year college program. You guys know that plan? It's where you're supposed to be there for 4 years, but then you're not.
You change your major.
Okay. But and you're not even changing your major. You're just not getting done. And you're on the 6-year plan, and you don't really know what you want to do, but you're gonna get it done eventually, and you're responsible for nothing that is in your life that's being taken care of by others, and you're on the 6-year plan. So then when you finish the 6-year plan, the folks who've been responsible for your 6-year plan are still taking care of you. They're still paying your rent. They're still buying you gas. They're still taking care of your car. You still have a family credit card that you can use. What do you think happens in that scenario where there's that sense of dependence affecting their effectiveness, their effectiveness?
Bitterness comes in.
From where?
From the person that's putting it out.
You'd think, but I can tell you in this case, there's not. Surprisingly. Appreciate that, because maybe where it is that I would rest, but it's not.
It's more from the other person, because now they don't know what to do.
Which person?
The person's been receiving all the benefits
Okay.
for the last 6, 18, 25 years.
Sure.
However long it happens to be, right?
Yeah.
Because now they don't know what to do.
Okay.
And sometimes we, as the benefactors,
Sure.
is that the right word?
Yeah.
we,
Beneficiary.
yeah, we expect them to just do it. To just go out and do. But they don't have necessarily the understanding of how to do such things.
Son passed away a couple of years ago. He was 5 years older than me. And first half of his life, he did nothing more at high school. Get up in the morning or afternoon, whichever, depending on how late his night was. You know, go hang out with the guys, hold a job occasionally for a week or two. No, I got him 2 jobs that he blew up within a month after hiring. And up until he was 30-ish, 35 maybe, he lived at home, and that's what he did. His father passed away. The parents evidently were okay with it.
Right.
The other 2 kids went to college, went out tremendously successful in their lives. 2 older ones, but he was the baby, and all they did was coddle him and enabled him. And he wasn't going to ever be anything. But anyway, Dad passed away. A few years after that, Nancy decided to, they were in Danville. She said, she come in one day and told Michael, she says, I'm moving back to Virginia Beach to spend some time with my sisters for the last part of my life. Miss them, I want to be with them. Michael goes, okay, when are we moving? And she says, no, I'm selling the house and I'm moving. You're not moving with me. Wherever you're moving is up to you. And he goes, oh, suddenly for the first time in his life, he was responsible for something.
Right.
It actually was a good thing for him. He finally said, okay, I've got to do something now.
Right.
He eventually got married. They had a happy life together. Never were going to be rich or anything,
Right.
but they sustained themselves and had a happy life together. She passed away. Then he had a major stroke and lived a few years later and passed away on from there.
Right.
And you know, I believe I'll see him in heaven again because I think his life was right at the end.
Right.
And but sometimes that's what you got to do. It's tough, but just to say sorry.
This question is about effectiveness, and that's kind of what Jerry was talking about. Is that in Jerry's scenario, and in the scenario I'm talking about with you, is Jerry's talking about a guy who eventually had to graduate from the being dependent and then looking at the effectiveness of his life, because certainly once he got married, there was going to be a different effectiveness about his life that needed to happen, because very likely his wife wasn't going to be okay with let's put our hands out and let's see what we get. And in the case of this young person who's significantly younger than your cousin, he's struggling with how to be effective in his life. He hates everything. He doesn't see work as really something that he should be participating in. He doesn't see the value in the providence of the place that he's been born. Doesn't see the providence in many ways of his financial situation, that his parents are able to do what it is that they do for him, because he just gets it. He just gets given. And his ability to be, not in a bad way, to independently impact and contribute is severely curtailed. And he's struggling because he's perpetually dependent. Now, I say that to you, recognizing that when we get to the supernatural aspect here, it's going to be almost the inverse of what we just discussed. Because in this lifetime, a worker is worth his wages, right? It means if you work, you eat. Typically, if you don't work, the old economy was you don't eat. And we unfortunately have a culture where a lot of folks don't believe that that's an okay axiom to live by. Especially because a lot of us as parents wanted our kids not to have the hardships that we never really did, what our parents never did. So we just gave our kids a whole lot of stuff.
Yes.
And some of you in this room remember that your parents made you get a babysitting job or a newspaper route as soon as you were able to take your bike out of the yard. And some of you have been working consistently since that age. My wife is a diligent diligent, hard worker, not because their parents forced her out, but just because she's a crazy work machine. And then some of us, our parents believed, I'm not giving you anything after you get like 12. So get out there and forage yourself in the wherever in the street. The second part of this question, somebody read it. Think second part of this question. How's it read?
Does dependency affect your sense of self-worth and happiness?
So we're going to start in there next week, but we're going to follow it up with the question that I think is a fun one. And that question is going to be, it's going to have to do with your philosophy about God being your co-pilot. Okay? Because around the time of WWJD, this was a very popular bumper sticker.
Yep.
God is my co-pilot. And so we're gonna piggyback with the response to both of these answers in terms of dependence affecting your effectiveness, and then talk about the second part of the question, and then talk about God being your co-pilot, some of those other little neat jingles. Because I will tell you, there are a lot of our churches that are very fine with Jesus being your co-pilot. Or Jesus taking the wheel.
That's what I was.
That's the other one. Jesus take the wheel.
After I'm in trouble.
So we'll talk about that once we get there. Because as we move down the pike, we're going to see that's not Paul's mindset at all. And Paul's a really big boy. He's a big boy Christian. He's able to put his pants on the right way and go, I'm okay with the fact that I might wear suspenders or I look like Lord Fauntleroy. He would dress the way the Lord told him to, and how he gets there is remarkable, because I'm reading this passage and I'm regularly challenged by, this hurts, this ain't working right, Lord. I'll be more effective if you let me. And he goes, nope. You're going to do it this way because you doing it this way makes me more effective. My problem with that, excuse me, we need to talk a little bit more about this. Maybe 3 times isn't enough. Maybe we need to, I've got a better solution. I will be more effective. I will be better if you fix this. And the Lord says, not going to do that. And Paul then goes, okay, I'm okay with that. I would hope you all have issues with that, because that's not how we roll. We ask for stuff, and when we don't get it, there's even passages in Jesus's, he tells parables, that the reason that you get stuff is sometimes you persist to keep asking. Exactly. The neighbor next door who needs bread at midnight, he gets the bread, not because his friend goes, here's some bread. He said, stop knocking on my door. So when I read 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, I go, part of the reason that this doesn't work out in Paul's favor is because Paul stops asking. The lesson here is beyond that. And that's part of our study, is to take a look at how Paul can turn on this, because we're going to see when we really get down the pipe, there's some other folks who didn't turn well on this. There's some other folks when God says, I do it my way, and people respond, I do it my way. We're going to take a look at that, because people don't do what Paul does here very well. And that's going to be the fun when you start taking a look at this. And then applying it to our lives, who we want to go, oh, yeah, when Paul says this, I get behind it. Well, you don't. Because we don't like being in this position, especially from a supernatural being who I don't even see very much / if at all, ever. Where is he during COVID? Right? Where is he during the pandemic? Where is he during this administration? Where is he during the situation of my life? He's not here. And I'm just supposed to trust and obey? There's no other way. I'm not okay with that. I'm done. Your commentary, your feedback before we close up. Virtual guy or folks here?
He gave you that.
I would hope as we go through this that you're able to do sometimes what Sarah does brilliantly, which is, I'm not okay with this. And here's why, folks. See, church people don't talk about not being okay with this, and so thus we all pretend we are. But if we talk through the fact that we're not okay with this, it would make it easier for us to live in community together and not act like we're perfect people. Because regular everyday Joes off the street struggle with the stuff that's in here, but we act like we're perfectly fine with it. And we're not. And so we need to talk about why we're not perfectly fine, and we need to talk with each other and then talk with those folks about how we turn into Pauls. Because sometimes it's not instantaneous for some of us, sometimes it's progressive. And we don't even get there by the time the end of our life happens, because we're still kicking the goals. Right? That's why we have these kind of conversations, to explore the human condition, so that we know that the folks who aren't in doing this today are just like we are. The grace of the Lord and his gradual, if not immediate, sanctification that happens for us allows us to read and see this differently as something other than foolishness.
He's okay with us asking him those questions.
He's well okay. The big problem is we regularly don't ask him those questions. We just read this, or we're afraid to read this, and then we act like we're heavenly beings who get together and gather in a special building on a day. And that ain't reality. So, what would make us more attractive, folks, is talking about the human condition and talking about our struggles with this and talking about why Jesus makes really, really good sense against all the craziness of the world. But you got to be able to get involved in the conversation. That's our lesson. That's our studies over the past 16 years. Feels like, well, 16 years in dog years is about 142. Feels like 142 years. Even though it's only been 16. All right. Any other things going as we close up? Thank you for hanging out with us, Pastor Bruce. Thank you for joining us just now, Delaney. I guess you got to get through the boring part, so you're coming into the energizing part, which is Brother Gene.
The other way around.
I'm going to throw at you, as I regularly do. It's not really a plug. If you're not YouTubing Kona Coast Fellowship and watching and listening to Bruce's sermons, you're missing out on number one, great landscape, great watching tides crash in the back. But Bruce is bringing it just as hard as Brother Gene's bringing it on this end.
What was my name again?
Brother Green. Brother Berean.
Hey, he does that to me all the time. Okay.
We do it actually much more intently with Jerry, so that his name actually becomes something different. And it's public. It's on a big screen. So the whole bar is calling Jerry something that's not his name.
Cool.
Talk with Jerry about that, to delight in it the way that he does. So let's pray, and then let's transition to some music and some other part of worship.